on, vinyl community? Welcome to a surprise Sunday video with The Record Spinner. In today's video, I am going to be submitting an entry into the Vinyl Tag Quarantine Edition. This was started by Dylan over at Noble Records. Basically, if you guys all know, vinyl tags are always at the beginning of each year. It's a set of 20 questions, and you showcase pieces of your vinyl collection to correspond with each question. And Dylan has come up with 20 questions for this quarantine edition, and I figured I'd jump in on the fun and do a video for it. So enough of the chit-chat, let's jump into what this video is all about. Starting off with question number 1. Favorite record from your home state or city? Now, I don't really have too many records of bands from the great state of New Jersey, but the one that obviously came to mind was Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet. Of course, this has a bunch of hits on it. You Give Love a Bad Name, Living on a Prayer, Wanted Dead or Alive. There's also some really awesome rockin' tunes on here like Let It Rock and Wild in the Streets. I have a lot of fond memories with this particular album. Growing up as a kid, I had the cassette, I believe, and my dad had a VHS tape of all of the music videos and band interviews from this era. And so watching that video and listening to this album does bring back a lot of great memories, and it does stand as, so far as of now, the only record that I have of a band that is from my home state. Question number 2, an album you highly recommend. For this question, I decided to dive deep and pick XTC, or Dukes of Stratosphere, whichever you want to call it, 25 O'Clock. This isn't really a full-length album. It's kind of like an EP, mini LP. Basically, when XTC was doing their regular stuff back in the 80s, they had a side project called the Dukes of Stratosphere, which was kind of like a long-lost, forgotten 60s psychedelic band. Each of the band members used different names for each other. And when you listen to this, you're immediately transported back into like 1967, 1968. Just think of, Piper at the Gates of Dawn, Sgt. Pepper, SF Sorrow, just kind of in a melting pot, and you get this album. Like, you can't help but just smile when you listen to this, and it's absolutely sensational. Highly recommend it. Question number 3, a tip for a beginner. Now, this is particularly for people that are going to be pursuing vinyl collecting in the long run, and that is investing in quality equipment. Now, that does not mean spend the farm. You don't need to spend $400 to $500 on your initial setup. You could do this rather inexpensively and also get great sound quality. The best inexpensive turntable that I could recommend is the Audio-Technica LP60. Runs about $90 to $100. Comes with a built-in preamp. Plays 2 speeds, 33 and 45, basically your main ones, essentially. All you need is a set of external speakers, and you are all set. Don't fall for the Crosley Cruisers, because if you start out with those, that might start your collecting journey off to a bit of a sour start. But then again, I'm not going to bash Crosley entirely, because I can understand why some people would gravitate towards them as like a sort of testing ground in case they would want to seriously pursue it. But for someone that's really into music and is really into vinyl and is out to get certain pressings and whatnot, you definitely want to be off to a great start, and the Audio-Technica LP60 is a great way to start. Question number 4. First record that really got you into deeper music. For me, it was this beautiful album here, The Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. I had first approached this album after seeing the Love and Mercy film, which is a great Brian Wilson biopic. If you haven't seen it, I really recommend it. I was well aware of the Beach Boys growing up as a kid, of course, thanks to the show Full House. But after seeing Love and Mercy, it really opened my eyes up to the inner workings of the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson's musicianship. And I'll never forget the first time that I listened to this album. It was Valentine's Day 2016. I was single, and my emotional life was just kind of a whole ball of craziness. It was all up in the air. And I remember I was watching a documentary about this album, and Brian Wilson said something along the lines of, in order to listen to Pet Sounds, you need to listen to it with headphones on and in the dark. And that's exactly what I did. And I was just absolutely mesmerized with this beautiful, sensible pop record that it just opened my ears up to another world of music that I don't think I would have ever approached if it wasn't for this album. So this album has a special place in my heart for that reason. Question number 5. An obscure record people may not know about. For this question, I picked The Young Vanes, Take a Vacation. Now, the Young Vanes was a band that comprised of two ex-members of the band Panic at the Disco. Basically, they did their second album Pretty Odd, which was very much in the sort of 60s psychedelia kind of vein, and two guys didn't want to continue in that direction. They kind of wanted to move forward because each of their albums are relatively different in their sound, but the two other guys wanted to keep going, so they left and started this band, the Young Vanes. And of course, I mean, this is the only album that they did. They kind of broke up soon after. But when you listen to this, think of the Beatles, the Beach Boys, the Hollies, and the Kinks all together in one, and you get this record. This is just a great kind of 60s sounding pop album made back in 2010. This is just an absolutely fun listen. Crazy enough, the vinyl pressing has gone out of print and it's kind of hard to come by, but it's up on the streaming services. Definitely worth checking out. Question number 6. A group who you collect all of their albums or try to. Now, with me, I'm a completist, so when it comes to bands that I like and groups I'm into, I try to get everything. That's just in my blood. But there's some artists where that's kind of hard to keep up with, particularly Mr. David Bowie. David Bowie has a massive catalog, and since his passing, there have been tons of posthumous releases, whether it's vinyl demo box sets, picture discs, record store day releases, exhibit exclusive releases. There's just all kinds of stuff, and it is really hard to kind of keep up. But then again, you know, I'm a huge David Bowie fan, and I would say between Bowie and Floyd, Bowie's probably the one artist that I have the most records of, simply because his catalog and his vinyl releases cover so much ground in terms of unique releases. Question number 7. A band whose second album is better than their first. For me, I picked Genesis Trespass. Their first album from Genesis to Revelation was almost in the vein of like kind of early Bee Gees vocal pop type stuff, whereas this establishes the progressive rock sound that Genesis would kind of delve deeper into with their subsequent albums. Now, that's not to say that From Genesis to Revelation is a bad album. It's just a total night and day difference, and in most cases, many people will refer to Trespass as sort of the first true Genesis album. Question number 8. Show and tell a whack-a-mole. Now, if you're living under a rock in the VC, Norman Maslov does this thing called whack-a-mole, where basically he picks random albums from his collection. He's not looking at his collection. He's kind of standing in front of it, picks random albums, shows them to the camera, and he kind of talks about them. They've asked us to do a whack-a-mole, so that's exactly what I am going to do. Let's pick something interesting. I'm going to reach all the way back here for this one. What do we have here? Cosmos Factory, Creedence Clearwater Revival. Creedence is a band that I'm getting really into recently. Kind of just slowly getting all their records, and this one has a lot of the notable ones. Heard It Through the Grapevine, Who'll Stop the Rain, Up Around the Bend, Run Through the Jungle, Looking Out My Back Door. Now, what's cool is I paid a really good price for this. This is $17. It's a newer pressing, but it is a Analog Productions pressing. Basically, Analog Productions did a pressing of this back around 2002, mastered by Kevin Gray and Steve Hoffman. Beautiful sounding pressing. It went out of print, and so I believe what they did was they just made new stampers, or they used the same metal parts from that pressing and pressed up a newer version, which came out, I want to say a couple years ago, and pressed on standard weight vinyl. But hey, for $17, Analog Productions, why not? Absolutely fantastic sounding pressing. Now we have question number 9. What album have you listened to the most in your life? Now, obviously, I don't keep mental statistics for this, but if there's one album that I've listened to a lot, it is this album, Kiss Destroyer. I remember when I was a kid, when I was in preschool, we would have like recess playtime. One time I brought my cassette copy of Destroyer with me to school, and the teachers gave me a little tape deck and headphones the size of like soup bowls and a bunch of like wooden blocks and wooden sticks. And I remember I just played my way through this album during recess in preschool, and I just have a lot of fun memories with this. And I think I had multiple cassette copies as a kid. I had the remastered cassette from '97, and then I had an older version, and then I have the CD. And just, I listened to it nonstop as a kid and still to this day. And usually when it comes to like me going to see a Kiss show, I'll bring some Kiss CDs with me to listen to on the road. This is one that I always bring with me. And it's certainly one that I've listened to, I guess you could say perhaps the most out of my entire collection. Question number 10. Show an album with a crazy story. For this, I picked Tales from Topographic Oceans by Yes. Now, this story has been stated a couple of times, and it adds to the lore of this record. And it basically goes that a couple of the members wanted to record this album in the city, a couple of members wanted to record the album in the country. So they compromised and decided that they would record in the city, but make the studio look like it was in the country. So they literally brought like stacks of hay and stacked the amplifiers on top and the keyboards. And apparently Rick Wakeman, the keyboardist, had to send off his keyboards to get repaired because there were like earwigs and stuff in the keyboards. Weird stuff. But of course, I think the wackiest of things that they did was that they had an electronic cow that had udders that would move backwards and forwards, which is entirely excessive, perhaps more excessive than the music on this record. I don't say that in a mean way, because this album is really solid. It's just a hefty meal. You know, you have 2 LPs, 4 songs, lasting about 20 minutes each. You definitely need to kind of prep yourself when it comes to listening to this album, but I think it's just an absolutely funny backstory in terms of how they got about recording this album. Question number 11. You're collecting pet peeves. Right off the bat, snobbery. There is nothing that grinds my gears more when it comes to someone ridiculing someone else because they listen to a certain band, a certain genre, collect certain records. You know, when it comes down to music, it is entirely subjective and it's down to the person's preference. And when it comes to collecting vinyl, there's no real golden rule to it. You know, one person might like rock, one person might like jazz. One guy goes after, original pressings. Someone else might buy reissues. It doesn't matter. Everyone has their own rules as to why they listen to certain bands, why they buy certain records. Who are you to judge? You know what I'm saying? That's the one thing that really ticks me off. Question number 12. An album or genre people would be surprised to know you like. Now, I have made no secrets in regards to this genre, but I do like me some country, folk, Americana type music. I showcase it every now and then when it comes to like new, vinyl acquisitions that I get. And every now and then I do like to mellow out to some John Denver, some Judy Collins, Nick Drake and whatnot. However, I will say this, I can only listen to it in very small doses because I need something to kind of pick me right back up. So then I'll of course go to like a Kiss record or a Black Sabbath record. But for me personally, like for example, for this guy here, John Denver, Poems, Prayers, and Promises, the guy was an amazing songwriter, had an amazing voice, an immense talent, someone that definitely left this earth far too soon, just an absolutely talented musician. Question number 13. A record from the year you were born. 1997 was the year that I emerged into this planet, and that also brought forth Dream Theater's Falling into Infinity. This is kind of a polarizing record in the Dream Theater catalog. This is them kind of caving into label temptation for a hit single, and also the fact that Kevin Shirley basically took all the songs that they had worked up for this album and completely kind of dissected them and churned them into something different. There's an official bootleg out there that has the demos that the band did for this album, and you can kind of hear what the original intent was with those demos and what it could have perhaps sounded like, maybe more so in the traditional, lines of a Dream Theater album. But this is something completely different from them, and also the only case where they actually worked with an outside writer on the song You Not Me. They used Desmond Child for the track, rather famous collaborator who did stuff with Kiss and Aerosmith and whatnot. But it is a rather interesting album, and there are some good tracks, but definitely is a bit of a weird one in their discography, and came out in 1997, the year I was born. Number 14, show a 10-inch record and or share your opinion on 10-inch records. So the one that I have that I'm going to show is Jethro Tull's North Sea Oil. This came out as part of Record Store Day 2019 to kind of coincide with the 40th anniversary of the Stormwatch album. This EP includes some songs off of the album as well as some extra cuts that would be featured on the 40th anniversary deluxe version that came out that year. In my opinion on 10-inch records, it's kind of a weird format because I can understand their importance with like the old gramophone records and shellac records, but once LPs were introduced, this is kind of just like a weird in-between mark between 7 inches and 12 inches. Of course it works for EPs like this, but it's just kind of an odd format. I of course buy them, like there's some releases that I go after that are exclusively available on the 10-inch vinyl format, but it definitely is kind of interesting, but nonetheless fun to collect. Question number 15, share an interesting fact about an album or song. Now with this, I picked a grail in my collection, and that is the White Stripes Live in Mississippi. Prior to this show going on, literally the night of the show, Meg White, the drummer of the White Stripes, went to Ben Blackwell, who is the White Stripes archivist, and he also runs Third Man Records with Jack White. She told him, this is the last show. And Ben's response was, oh yeah, this is the last show of the tour, because it was. And she said, no, this is going to be the last White Stripes show. Now, the fans, of course, didn't know this. And in terms of the inner sanctum around the band, who really knew? So I guess, you know, they took it upon themselves to record this record for that purpose, or unless they recorded this specifically for the sake of archiving, you know, just a regular show. But years later, when the band announced that they were disbanding, this particular show and release took on a whole new meaning. Question number 16. Show an album with an animal on the cover. Fairly easy. Pink Floyd's Adam Hart Mother. It has just a cow on the cover. Storm Thorgerson was commissioned to create kind of an abstract kind of album cover. So what more abstract could you get than just a picture of a cow? And it's funny, in my neighborhood, there's a little animal farm next door. And every time I walk by it and I see some cows, I always call them Adam because of this album cover. Question number 17, show an album with crazy artwork. And this album actually is one of my favorite cases of album artwork, and that is King Crimson's Lizard. I'm going to give you guys some close-up shots of that album cover. Look at all that. So, like, they have the letters of the band name, and in the middle, around all of the letters, they have various paintings referencing the lyrics of the album. And it's also on the back side. Such beautiful artwork, too. I really admire this stuff. And if you look on the eye right here, you can actually see the Beatles. There's John and Yoko, Ringo, Paul's there, George is meditating. You have the Knight and the Grim Reaper. That's referencing the Lizard Suite. The Circus here for the opening track, Circus. Just really cool little Easter eggs interlaced with all the letters of the band's name, and just absolutely beautiful artwork. Number 18, show a really good album that you can find for cheap. I picked REO Speedwagon's High Infidelity. This album sold millions back in the day. This has a bunch of hits on it. You have Don't Let Him Go, Keep On Loving You, Take It on the Run. Just some really great tracks on here. A lot of bands of this nature, you know, the REO Speedwagons, the Kansas, Styx, Farner, bands of that sort, you can easily find their records in dollar bins. Granted, I didn't really pay dollar bin prices for this pressing that I have. This is the Friday Music version that was cut by Kevin Gray and comes on blue vinyl, but you can easily find this rather inexpensively. Number 19, show an album with an acquired taste. Now, a lot of people are picking things like Trout Mask Replica and just albums of that nature, but I decided to just go a little polarizing, let's just say. I chose Linkin Park's album One More Light. This is, as of now, their last album. Very much in the sort of kind of modern trendy pop vein, a lot of like high-pitched vocals and typical production values of modern pop music. This really bears no resemblance to the Linkin Park that everyone knew and loved them for, the kind of merge between metal and rap. This is as far as they got from it, and for a second when I first bought this album, I thought that my record collection became kind of obsolete just because of how odd this album was. But it wasn't until vocalist Chester Bennington passed away that some of the lyrical content on this album took on a whole new meaning. So I think after that, I began to appreciate this album much more. But definitely upon first listen, definitely was an acquired taste. And then we have number 20, Show Your Most Recent Find. The most recent record that I got my hands on is this album here. This is Stephen Kalinick, A World of Peace Must Come. This is a psych poetry album that was recorded back in 1969, co-produced by Brian Wilson. Stephen Kalinick had written some stuff for the Beach Boys, particularly on the Friends album. He did this album. He was signed to their label Brother Records, but it never came out. It just kind of sat in the vaults until 2008, and then the label Light in the Attic did this vinyl pressing back in 2014 for Record Store Day. Got this for like $5. It's really not bad, and it definitely is a rather cool listen if you're into words and some psychedelic tinges to them. So there you guys go. That is my entry into the Vinyl Tag Quarantine Edition. If you're watching this video and you have a channel of yourself and you haven't done a video, tag, you are it. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead, give it a like, subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support this channel, be sure to check me out on Patreon. See you guys in the next video. And most importantly, keep the records spinning.